When working with CloudPress as a web design platform, the concept is based on something called modules and rows, and we're going to talk about that in this video. Let's first look at a broad stroke of what a module and what a row is. If you go up to the tool area, which is this plus sign, you can see that modules and rows are in the listing here. Rows are these sections or segments of areas where content's going to be stored on the page. A row is basically a column or multiple columns of space or a container on the page where we're going to put modules. And modules are things like content for the website, text, images, videos, forms, etc. Modules are those objects, and with CloudPress you have dozens of modules and many libraries of different kinds of modules or tools to work with. There are the standard modules, and then there's some subsequent volume of several tools and basically web page objects you can use. And each library contains various modules. But before we start putting modules on the page, let's take a look at what rows do. As you can see, I've got some preset rows here. 1 column, 2 columns. Rows can have multiple columns, obviously. You can even make rows that have more than 6 columns, but it would be rare. In most cases, you're going to use 6 or less. And so these are just the most common layouts for rows. If I drag one out onto the screen, it's going to reveal something about the page that will be helpful. Let's just take a 1 column row and drag it onto the screen. Now when I do, you can see some dotted lines that show up that kind of give us the layout of this particular page. We're going to deconstruct this page a little bit to better understand the use of these rows and these multi-column rows. I can put this column that I've just dragged out into a number of places. I can put it inside this particular container, or this one, or outside of it by going up here, or in between these things by going like this. So let's talk about what all these different containers are and what they do. First, I'll drop it right here so you can see what it looks like when I add a new row. This is a single column row with nothing in it. In other words, there is no module in this container. This is a module, but this is an empty row. Okay, so let's delete it and take a look at what this page has on it. First of all, you need to know that this entire section with the gray image in the back is a single column row, just like the one we were working with, except that it has a lot of modules in it and it has its own settings. The reason I know that is because when I hover over it, you can see that it lights up blue. And here's the little control box for this single column row. If I hover over it, in fact, I can see that it's a row because it shows me the row settings when I hover over the wrench. If I click on the wrench, I can change the settings for this row. Let's take a look at some things that are important. First of all, the width of this row is considered full width. In other words, it stretches all the way across the browser window. So no matter how wide the user's browser is, this row is going to stretch full width. However, the content within this row is fixed. I've got it fixed at 1100 pixels. That means I don't want the content to be more than 1100 pixels wide at its widest point. I could make this full width, but it actually looks better to have a fixed width content in a full width row. That's just a design decision, and it's a pretty common one. Of course, there are several other things I can do for this row. And in this case, this row has a background image, which you can see here under background photo. It also has some overlay colors to kind of give a subtlety to that background image. So that's how this particular row was designed. We're not going to take it apart, but I want you to see that this row is an important part of this page. It's being used as the header, and it has some important content in it called modules. So let's cancel out of this. So we've been talking about this entire full width row. Now, let me go back and add a row again, just because when I add one, you can see these highlights a little easier. Notice that while the row, the full width row, does continue on to the edge of the browser, you'll see a gray dotted box that all the content is inside. That's our 1100 pixel fixed content area. So that's why when I drag a column out into this row, it stays within this content area of 1100 pixels. So it may seem confusing, but once you do this for a few minutes, it actually makes good sense. We've got a row, we've got a full width row, and then we've got a content area within the row. And it's in this content area that we're going to be putting all of our modules or our website content. So I could put this column, again, inside the content area at the top of it, or I could even put it inside this particular module area. I could put it in between them, either horizontally or vertically. So for now, again, I'm going to just drop it and delete it so that we can take a look at some of these modules. Let's take it one at a time. Now that you know that we're working within a full width row that has a content area of 1100 pixels, let's look at the actual content. This module is called a heading. You can tell when you hover over the wrench what kind of module this is. Since it's providing a link to the heading settings, I know this is a heading or a header. And if I click on it, I can actually adjust the settings that are available for this kind of an object. They're pretty simple because that's all it is it's just a heading. In other words, it's called an HTML tag, in this case an H1. It could be any one of these special codes. It could even be a link if I wanted it to, and I can change those parameters. Almost every object has a style tab where I can change colors and fonts and spacing. Depending on the type of module you're working at, these will change. And almost every object has an advanced section where we can work with margins and padding. That will be a very important part of the design process we'll talk about in other videos. But this is a pretty basic module because it's just a heading. I'm going to cancel out of it. We'll look at another one. So this is an object that I drug into the content area. I also drug this object into the content area, but this is not text or heading. This is something known as a separator. So let's look at this. Also a simple object. I can choose the color and the height of it, how wide I want it to be, how I want it to align, and the style of the line I'm using. And again, we can work with padding and margins. This got here by simply dragging it into place. If we go to the modules palette, this is the separator object I use. I just drug it into place, chose the color that I want, the settings that I want, and click save. And there was my separator. It's just as easy to remove as it is to add. This X removes the object. This icon allows me to get back to the settings for this column. This allows me to duplicate it, very handy if you're going to be making more than one thing. And of course we talked about the wrench, which allows me to go into the settings. And then this icon allows me to move this around the page into different positions if I wanted to. But in this case, I'm going to delete it since I already have one, and we'll click the X. Now you'll notice that we have a module here that's actually a video module, and we can set the link to the video here, what kind of video we're using, and other important data about the video. But you'll notice that it's actually next to, not on top of, but next to some other modules. Well, how did we do that? Well, remember, we can make a 2-column row. So what we did was we added a row with 2 columns. We set it in here. And in this section, we drug in a video object. I'm going to go to Modules, Video, drag it right into place. And I can tell it which video I want to use and all of the settings that the video is going to need. I'll cancel out of that for now. And then in this row, we drug in this object, which is in fact just a simple text object. Let's go get one. This is the text editor object, and all I did is drag it into place like this. And put my text in here. And there you have it, a 2-column row. Now, how about this object which is underneath this? Well, you can actually stack objects within the same row if you want to. So what I did here was I went to my modules and I looked for contact form module, which is right here, and put it right underneath the text. So I can put it outside on its own, but that won't line up right. So I'm going to put it right here inside this area, this content area, where it's going to be stacked underneath my other module, my text module. And there I could design my form the way I want it to. So there's my text, there's my form. This would contain my video. Now once I set those things the way I want them, they would of course line up nicely and look like this. Let's get rid of them for now. Remember, we can delete things by clicking the X. Since I've deleted these, I now have just a 2-column row with nothing in it. So let's delete it. If I delete this one, it switches to a 1-column row, but I don't want it at all, so I'll delete that. These are the basic workings of CloudPress. You're working with rows, single or multi-column content areas, and dragging modules into them. That's pretty much it. That's the basic of it. In future videos, we'll talk more about those modules, and there's some great things you can do with your rows as well, like save them for later use once you've designed one. If you look at the rows options by clicking here, you can see that columns, these preset columns, is just one of the groups available. CloudPress also provides you with a number of pre-built, that is pre-designed rows. These are literally templates that you could choose from. So if you're trying to build a content area with a column, you can actually choose one that's already pre-built from here and simply drag it out onto the screen and change or edit the contents. So here's a great content area that's made up of 6 photos. So rather than building them from scratch, you can actually drag this out onto the screen like this. Here I put it above this other one. And it starts me off with a template right here that I can work with and edit. It's already got the headings and it's got the photos. I would just need to change those. And if I don't like it, just delete it by clicking the X. Also under the rows section, not only do you have pre-built rows with different categories, content, call to action, lead generation rows, those are lead capture forms, but you can also save your columns for later use. I haven't saved any in this particular project, so my list will be empty. But once I've designed a column or a row the way I like it, I can just save it right here and use it again in other pages of this project. There's other ways to save your work too we'll talk about in another video. But for now, you need to know how rows work, that they can be nested, that they can be multi-column. You can put contents inside a row and multiple contents inside a row and stack it on top of each other. Or by using columns, you can put content next to each other. The best way to learn it is to take either a pre-built column or a full-page template and simply deconstruct it, move things around so you can see how they work. But this is what makes this design platform so powerful and so easy to use, because it's literally, as you can see, drag and drop. You can move things around into position exactly where you want them to be when you're designing a website with CloudPress.